All right, why don't we go ahead? My name is Andrew Marsh. Good morning, folks. Thanks for joining. I'm leading a conversation today about application decommissioning, or app decom as we call it, and broadly how to justify, kick off, or scale a program in your organization. I want to take a moment to give you a lay of the land here. Um, I've got a couple of experts on the line with me today for an interactive panel discussion. Ron Stevenson's currently working at Fairview Health Systems in Minnesota, and he's been working closely with our team for a couple of years. And at Fairview, they've been scaling an enterprise app decom program now, again, for a couple of years. Good morning, Ron.
Hi.
We also have Kevin Navin on the phone. Kevin is our VP of Services and Programs at Platform 3 Solutions. Kevin's actually been working in the app decom space since it was the app decom space, probably one of the earliest adopters in app decom. I don't want to date you too much. I don't know how long this space has been around, Kevin. It's fairly nascent, but you're one of the goats as it relates to app decom. So welcome. Good to see you.
Good morning.
We also have a couple of folks on our team helping out to moderate. Tracy is going to be hopping on and delivering the WHOOP drawing towards the end of our presentation today, and Sky's going to be helping me out with moderation. So just a couple of level set items here. We're recording the session, so it will be available. We'll make the recording available after the session is closed. We're going to give you two options to talk. So we're going to allow conversation in the session today. So everyone needs to be on their best behavior, please. But we're going to give you two options. You can just type your questions into the chat box. We're using a new platform here. It's a new platform for webinars anyway. It's Microsoft Teams for webinars. The good news is it should be very familiar to just about everybody. If it's not Zoom, it's been Teams pretty much for the last 2 years. So this should be a pretty familiar platform to just about everyone. But I am going to ask you, if you want to speak live, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. When you go up to that little box in the top there, you can see I've got it highlighted. And put your hand up, and Sky will make sure you get the opportunity to ask your question live. And like I said, you can always just ask your question right in the chat window. We also sent out a survey to everybody who pre-registered more than a day or so ago, and we got some of those survey results back, and we're going to share some of those with you this morning as well. Pretty cool that the responses we expected were actually the responses that we got. So we'll share those with you as well. And then I want to just let's jump into the agenda. I want to make sure that we level set on what technology debt means. In fact, again, to the questions, we left an open question for one panelist, for one respondent responded with, make sure you clarify what technology debt means. So we're going to kick off with what technology debt means. Really, I'll give you a couple of different representations of that, and then we'll jump into that panel discussion with our experts. And the good news is Ron's been doing this for the last couple of years, year and a half, really. They've really been going at it at Fairview Health. So he's got some battle scars, and should be a good conversation today.
Yeah, you keep saying expert, Andrew, but I'm really just learning the industry. It's, I wouldn't say I'm an expert at all, but definitely battle tested. That's fair.
Battle tested. Let's go with that. So let's start with our understanding of what technology debt is. And what I mean by that is, let's use the Gartner description of technology debt. So I'm just going to read it to you because it's too difficult or too long to memorize. So according to Gartner, technology debt is the outstanding amount of money an organization must spend on digital technology cost obligations to continue doing business. And actually, technology debt includes technical debt. So it's a component of technology debt, but it's also a broader term. So it's a much larger, technology debt is part of a much larger iceberg that CIOs struggle to quantify and reduce. And in fact, as a result, particularly in the events of the last couple of years, the whole migration to working from home. We found this article in Information Week in December of last year. The IDC forecasts that 70% of CIOs are dealing with inertial drag on IT agility. So the push now, it was really the events of the last 2 years have really been the inflection point that have driven the move to the cloud, for example, the move to open source, and just generally the CIOs to move and rethink how they architect their infrastructure and their environments. So it couldn't be a better time to address technology debt. If I was going to represent it a different way, if you go back to the agenda of this session, it's how do we fund innovation with technology debt? And it's a bit of a misnomer, so I want to make sure that we're crystal clear on what this really means to us. What this really means to us is if you've got technology debt that if you consider your IT budget as part of a balancing act and technology debt takes up a huge chunk of it, as per what Gartner says, and you saw from that previous slide from Information Week, our goal really is to take that funding from technology debt and reduce it and allow you to fund those innovation or those projects for innovation moving forward. Spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to represent this. This is the best I could come up with. So hopefully this makes sense, but the whole goal here is to eliminate that the expense that you have on keeping those old applications alive, whether it's virtual machines or people or databases or infrastructure or a combination of all those things, eliminating those expenses so that you can turn that money that you're spending on those things into future innovations. And listen, this is not sexy, right? What we do, I'm a curator, right? I'm the undertaker of data. That's what we do for a living. So that we don't want to engage in projects that don't make sense because it doesn't make any sense. We're not selling anything new and hot. We're not forward-looking IT projects. What we're trying to do is trying to fund your forward-looking IT projects. So we only engage in projects that make financial sense for our customers. I want to hop I want to just make sure I've got all the points covered I wanted to there. Yeah, I do. So I wanted to hop over to some of the survey questions that we popped up because I think they're relevant. So for the people that are in attendance today that got the survey in time and were able to respond to it, I'm super excited to see that a lot of people either are working on building a formal decom program or already have projects underway. In fact, 2/3 of you, of the people that respond, of our respondents, have already in one of those two categories. The one that concerns me a little bit more is that brown one on the right-hand side, and a project here and a project there. And I think both Ron and Kevin have something to say. And I see you nodding there, Ron, but I haven't warmed you up to this presentation at all. So I expect that that this will be an important topic when we kick off. That it's probably not a great proposition to kick off a project here and a project there, as it relates to funding an overall environment for reducing technology debt. It generally doesn't make as much sense to do it that way. And then hopping to another one of the questions, in fact, the first survey question that we sent out, the number one challenge that our respondents saw for their organizations is executive sponsorship. Again, I called out just a moment ago that executive sponsorship I called out a moment ago that I thought it was interesting to see what you guys provided as feedback, because if I dovetail that to what we see as the three primary patterns, and this is from a conversation that Kevin and I have been having over the last several months, there's three primary patterns for where we get engaged. And this is my last slide before we jump into the panel discussion. So these are the three primary places where I see us getting engaged when we engage with our customers. So by the time they have called us, by the time we're involved with a conversation with a customer, they're trying to figure out how to get executive sponsorship, or they've got executive sponsorship and they don't know what to do with it. They've got a team of people that sort of begged, borrowed, and stolen from DBAs and developers, and maybe they're outsourcing some of it. So they're lacking that focus. They don't have a dedicated team that's focused purely on application decommissioning. And then one that I see most often is just failure, something I call failure to launch. And that's really somebody that's gone out and spent a bunch of money on open text technology like InfoArchive, and they spent a year and a half trying to figure out how to run this as a program at scale. And that's something that's all we do. Let me just talk a little bit about what we do at Platform 3 Solutions. All we do is help our customers focus on addressing their technology debt, right? All we do is help them rationalize and fund their forward-looking projects by eliminating their technology debt. And translated loosely, all we do is application decommissioning, migrations and decommissioning. So we're really, really good at it. And that's why we have experts that can move through your project times quickly and efficiently. So with that, I think I want to pass it over to I'll open up the floor to Ron and Kevin. And I wanted to ask you, Ron, as we get started, out of those three, and maybe it's a combination, out of those three, do you recognize a pattern? Like, if I'm not mistaken, when I was asking you recently, I think when you guys engaged us, you guys had done something like 9 projects over your first year and a half with an application decommissioning program, and you're somewhere in the 30s now. And you've done 9 applications in the first 2 years, and now you're in the 30s in the year and a half that you've been working with us. So you've added 30 additional applications in the year and a half you've been working with us to your app decom program.
Right. And when I think about the 3 bullets that you put there, executive sponsorship, failure to launch, and forget the middle one there, I would say for us, we had the executive sponsorship that we needed. We had great direction from the top to say, do this. But even with that direction, even with the support, we struggled with the other 2 elements of it. And I think we had a really hard time getting our arms around figuring out what savings we were going to be able to make with certain applications. And then, like you said, the skill set to it. You could say we have 30 archives that we need to sort of implement into InfoArchive. It was very difficult to get our arms around what that looked like and just streamline it. And that's where.
And that was, if I'm not mistaken, Kevin, that was one of the first things we did, right? You spent a couple of weeks on the phone with them in 1 to 2 hour sort of control sessions.
Exactly right. Yep.
How do we put the framework together, right?
Yep. And I think there's a lot of things that we learned from you guys, but the thing that Kevin did for us was he helped us. I think one of the biggest things we struggled with was getting our customers to know how to reach us and how to engage with this small team that we put together. And Kevin really helped us. And he said, here's a process that you can take for, sort of evaluating, and then all the way down to ultimately saying this application will potentially save you X dollars, kind of by going through that process.
Right. And I think Kevin, if you were going to describe it, you would describe, I've seen your, I don't know what you call that chart, but there's about 150 steps in it. I mean, you do an amazing job of simplifying it, but the devil in the details is, how do you get from, I've got 2,000 apps that I need to decom, to a program that says we're going to do 50 a year for the next 3 years, and this is how we're going to do it. How do we prioritize and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So what we did with Fairview, what we've done with multiple customers, is we try and help them, figure out an intake process that helps them kind of take that that kind of big, like monster, how do you eat a, elephant type scenario, and start digesting it a little bit more, helping put some priorities around it, start to understand what is coming in. And it's kind of a circular situation where, and what we did with Fairview is that once we ironed that out, then they started publishing it, right? They started putting it out on their intranet. They started socializing it within the organization. And so that it just kind of perpetuates itself and grows. And so the more people that understand the process, then they use the process, and then it just helps, Ron's team and others prioritize as well, and then helps the factory process become more efficient. So it is a very circular sort of, situation. But if I go back and look at your slide where you had those 3 items, which I think was executive sponsorship, failure to launch, and focus groups, I think that what we see a lot of times is, as Ron alluded to, is that most organizations have kind of one of the 3. They never really seem to get all 3. With one of the large customers that I worked with for years, they had all 3, and it was amazing what they could accomplish with all 3. And what I see kind of more frequently, though, is kind of what Ron described, is where they'll have one of the 3, and then they have to start building up the other 2. And there is no actually right or wrong way. You have to do with what you can within your organization, but it's not really till you get all 3 of those aspects, really fine tuned, that you can really, I mean, we're talking like substantial benefits across the organization. And again, they all feed one another. So the more executive sponsorship you get, the more you get out of the specialized teams, or the siloed approaches, right? So you have, and we've seen this as well too. What's really common is you have an archive team. Typically, it's part of their DBA group, their data management group, and they're trying to help the organization, manage legacy data, and they're doing the best they can, but they're wearing several hats. So when you get the executive sponsorship, you get the business line of business support and those types of things, then you can get that team a little bit more robust, and that team can actually partner with other teams that are very important. You get teams like the infrastructure teams managing security risks. You get the data or the risk teams managing data risk and analysis and those types of things. So once you get all 3 of those areas working together, it's real powerful and productive.
Yeah. And as you guys are talking, I want to say, Sky, quickly, let's open up. If the panel, if you guys are ready, I think we're ready for questions too. If there's people, it looks like we got one that just came in. I wanted to call that out, but I think, Sky, if you wanted to call out that question, we can defer, and I can take a crack at it.
Yeah, sounds good. We have a good question in the chat from Aaron.
So it looks like failure to launch is truly due to an issue of not knowing where to start. And again, that's literally where we started, Ron, with Fairview, right? We started with a framework before we ever got to, hey, listen, let's deploy and get software up and running. You guys already had the components working. Obviously, Platform 3 is the product company as well as this consulting company. So we have tools that we bring to bear to help them streamline their program. But yeah, the start of the conversation was, how the hell do we get from old application to a program that, like you said, Ron, how do people don't even know who to call, right?
Yeah. And I think that Fairview's situation is probably typical of many. We had InfoArchive in place for years, and it had the same 9 applications in it. And then off to the side, we had 5 SQL Server reporting services, and then a few one-offs that were built by third parties. So we had all of these different places, and our primary customer in healthcare, Fairview's healthcare, our primary customers for these archived applications are health information management, people that have to go in and serve up requests for information. That staff was having to go to 6, 7, 8 different places for one request. And so to go back to the question, even with all of the pieces in place, we didn't have a place to go to say, we have an application that needs to be archived. We're going to do this, right? Someone would say, well, I know how to do SQL Server reporting services, and that's a database. We can do it over here, right? Instead of saying, we have Info Archive, this is our process, and just start at the top and go down. And so that really what I think the answer to the question is yes. Even with the tools, we didn't know where to start, right? Yeah. And so we had to have that process, putting that process in place. And even though you mentioned Kevin's process is very detailed, we just dumbed it down for the things that were important to us, right? He gave us 100 bullets. We took 15 of them and said, this is what we're going to do, right? Yeah. So for us, that really worked. We took the roadmap and made it our own roadmap. And I'm not going to say we have been flawless in our efficiency, but we have really saved and you mentioned technology debt, that IT debt. When I think of what IT debt is, I think it's a whole bunch of little things that are not tangible dollars, right?
Exactly.
ServiceNow knowledge base articles, maintaining those, just that kind of stuff, all the pieces that go into it, training, all the elements that you can't quantify are really to what we've saved the most.
Yeah. No, a couple of things sort of piqued what you said. Like we actually did integrate. Well, integrate with the ServiceNow program in terms of the process, right? Like
that's what right.
He gave you the tools so to change your ServiceNow process so that people have a ServiceNow process now that says, I want to decom this application.
You got it. Yep. That's exactly right.
And kind of step one to getting that stuff going.
We had ServiceNow entries for all the different applications because they were all over the place. Now we have essentially 2: engage, archiving, or decommission an application, right? That's pretty much it. There are just 2. And then there's a ton of knowledge base articles now that point everybody to one place with just details about each one.
Yep.
Each
and
application.
Holistically as part of the program, right? ServiceNow also gives you the ability to give you the start of some of the tools that allows you to be holistic and say, okay, this application is decommissioned. Now we can start deconstruction as well, which means returning database licenses as needed, literally recycling hardware and infrastructure as needed, or CPUs back to the pool that then becomes part of the larger organization. All that soft dollar stuff that's so difficult to put your finger on.
And you mentioned CPUs. That was one of the biggest catalysts for us, is that we were getting hit by our IT network or our server teams saying we have these old OSs that need to be upgraded, and they're from 2005 or what have you. And so the cost to upgrade was going to be pretty expensive. And then we realized that the applications on there just needed to be decommed and put into Info Archive. And, all of that added up to various savings.
Actually, Ron, coincidentally, we have another question from the panel that talks about legacy technical sprawl, where each executive sponsor wants their own application. And again, I think Kevin, you and Ron both agree, right? It's like, no, this is the process that happens in place. And part of the reason that we're having this discussion as part of the Solex, the Solex solution extension team, is because OpenText has a product called Info Archive, which is a legacy. It's designed specifically for archiving of unstructured and structured content. And so what you do is you normalize all the applications, and you don't normalize. Sorry, let me take a step back. You archive those applications as applications into Info Archive, and part of that interview process is Info Archive allows us to build you a screen that looks and feels familiar to the people that use those legacy applications. So as part of that decommissioning program, we're going to build you a user experience that it's not the old application. It's not a reskinning of the old application. It captures all of your content at rest, whether that's data or documents or both, and allows you to perform a search as if you needed that data as active data today, but it's all data at rest and data in place. So you've normalized that.
I think though, in addition to that, as part of a program and you know, the work that we do with customers and the programs that we set up is, before we even do that with the data within InfoArchive, we start to have those dialogues and conversations, and we bring some of the people within the organization, most of the time finance folks, legal folks. So we figure out what data actually needs to be retained. So it's not, so we're optimizing that. So, you know, we're going through some diligence before we put the data into an archive. So they're doing minimally what they need to get the benefits or meet the requirements, you know, that are set forth by the organization or the industry that they operate. So that's a very important factor, because when you're dealing with a lot of old legacy systems, depending on your industry, depending on the data, you know, you want to be very particular, because, you know, we know how this goes from a legal litigation perspective. You know, one set of data can save you, the other set of data can hurt you, right? So you have to go through some of that, and that's some of the things that we do as well, is help organizations structure that. But the other thing I wanted to go back to a little bit too is that one of the things that, you know, Ron spoke to it a little bit as well, is that, you know, creating, whether you call it a service group, and this kind of goes back to that question where you have multiple sponsors. But one of the things that we've seen be very beneficial is within an organization, whether it's, you know, a small team starting out, or whether it's a larger executive sponsorship, creating a center of excellence, creating a service that you've developed and can offer throughout the organization. We see that as being very beneficial. The organizations that do that, because what happens now is they become the experts. They become the go-to, you know, group. And so, yeah, there might be some organizations that try and create these one-off, you know, report repositories or some other type of archive solutions. But if you construct a center of excellence or a data lifecycle management organization, or whatever you want to, you know, name it, you'll be able to tie together. Okay, well, we can bring in legal, you know, we can bring in, you know, records management or EGRC and those types of folks into the equation. We know what parameters are set up across the organization. So you're kind of become those experts across there. So that the chances of these individuals setting up these one-off solutions becomes less and less of an issue, right? Because you've got everything covered, right? You know, you guys want something for 2 years, we can do it. You want something for a lifetime, we can do it. You want something that integrates with, you know, maybe you want to see it from your, you know, what we're doing a lot now is with SAP, you know, archiving out of SAP. You don't want all your history in SAP, you know, S/4HANA. You only want, you know, a limited amount of data, but you still want access to data for its lifetime. So now we can set up ways to do that as well. So you can see it from your strategic system, you can see into the archives. And I know you and Ron have worked a lot in that space as well. So so those are really some of the key things when you get into, and I'm kind of reading between the lines on that last question, but, you know, when you get these kind of multiple, you know, strategies and things set up, you know, having that singular enterprise center of excellence is really, and we see a lot of folks going that way, and that's where really starting to see a lot of benefits there too.
Yeah, and Kevin, one of the things that we did, this was our program manager suggested this, and it really helped us, is that we did a roadshow for the archive team. So once we kind of got established, we met with different groups, legal, finance, different operational areas throughout the healthcare enterprise, and introduced ourselves to them, did a little slide and said, this is who we are and this is what we do. And this is why you guys need to know we're out here. And it really helped. So when a contract was coming up, for example, the contract team would reach out to us and say, hey, I remember you did your roadshow. This contract is coming due in 3 months for this application. should we renew it? That was really, really advantageous for the program to make people aware of what we do.
Right. And then, what's great about that, Ron, is that what you start to see now is you start to see the hard dollars start to materialize. So where you probably started off and to some extent was kind of soft or guesstimates or estimates that were coming out because you really didn't
satisfying compliance stuff. Sorry to interrupt, but right. Sometimes it's just, hey, listen, this thing is so old, it's going to fall apart. We don't even know if we can restart the OS.
Yep. That's exactly true, Andrew.
Yeah.
It's happened a number of times. Yep.
But as you mature, then all of a sudden the hard dollars start to become more and more prevalent. You start to
case in point, right? You've got Kevin. You're working on an SAP archival at the moment with another customer, right? I know, Ron. We're currently kicking off a project to retire an Epic system. We're in process of retiring a Cerner environment, right? So now we're getting to the big fish, the ones that are big shiny objects. So no question, it's sort of grown into like out of pure absolute, this thing is going to die any day now necessity to we can really turn this into an opportunity to save a bunch of money, right? We're talking high 6-figure numbers to maintain some of those legacy environments.
Yep. I'll admit it's still hard sometimes to quantify. We're better at it. I think the two areas where we still struggle is that we don't know all the different businesses very well, right? So if someone has to retire an application around, a certain part of healthcare, maybe let's say the OR, and none of us really understand how the OR operates. You have to learn to become a business expert, even though you have the SMEs to help you. Yep. It's still, that's the challenge for us, is becoming an expert, if you will, for a 6 or 8 week period, to understand the business and archive it properly. And then, of course, those hard dollars.
Now, I know we're about halfway through. I know we've got a bunch of folks on the phone. So, this session is for you guys. So if you've got questions, if we're going the wrong direction, if you want to talk deeper about tools, if you want to talk about how to fund the sponsorship or what the program looks like, frameworks and that sort of thing, we can take this a bunch of different directions. So make this valuable for you. I want to make sure you're getting a good use of your time for those attendees on the call. So don't hesitate to post your questions or raise your hand and ask live. But otherwise, as you can tell, Ron and Kevin and I can talk all day. We'll go out for a beer and talk about this stuff.
Exactly. Super geeks.
Yeah. So in lieu of that, let's talk about some of the tools then that we bring to bear on, right? Because I know
I'm going to interrupt you. You said early on that you guys aren't forward looking and you aren't creating the hot the hot software or whatever it was. And I'll tell you why I disagree with it. And it's not that you didn't set me up for this, but one of the things, and I don't know the panel or if the attendees, if any of them are really into healthcare, and healthcare is the only thing I know, and it's very specific. But one of the things that we struggled with our InfoArchive platform was being able to deliver a healthcare looking product, right? InfoArchive is great because it's agnostic to the industry and you can archive anything to it. But for healthcare, we had some very specific needs around how to deliver the data, the request for data out to, whatever, a legal entity or what have you. And so where you guys really helped us is you helped us develop software to do that, because there really wasn't anything on the market that we found that would really sit over InfoArchive. And look, it's not a sales pitch. What you guys did for our organization was tremendous and helping us build that Patient 360 application. Really, really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that, Ron.
Well, you said you weren't building hot stuff, and I was like, that's offensive. This is really hot stuff.
Listen, it's all about perspective, right?
I guess so.
So yeah, no, absolutely. So again, some of the tools that we do bring to bear is we have a highly specialized product called Archon, sorry, I nearly forgot the name. Highly specialized product called Archon that's designed purely for what I would call an ETL, but it's really E and L. There's very little transform required in scenarios where you want to move content into the archive. So if you combine, in fact, someone was asking about the data layer, and one of the questions that just popped up, one of the big challenges that, particularly in healthcare, that we have some competitors in the environment that want to synthesize all those legacy systems into a single data model. But the combination of our technology with InfoArchive from OpenText is we really just take that application en masse, if you will. We say this is the data that we need out of that application. Let's formalize a taxonomy from that data and then just move it through into the archive as if it's a separate application. So in the application archive, we have an application that is linked to what the source application's name was. So anyone that knew the source application will also know the target applications. And that allows us to bypass the whole struggle of normalizing or building that taxonomy that says we need to figure out how to synthesize these 10,000 different tables into a standard taxonomy. Right? So the combination of what we do, which is specialized ETL, we're highly focused on connectors that allow us to extract those source systems. Sometimes they're business level connectors, like connecting to SAP. Sometimes they're just JDBC drivers connecting to source databases. Sometimes they're a combination of them, right? We can archive things from Mobius and legacy content systems like Mobius and Content Manager on Demand. Those are really application connectors more than they are JDBC connectors. Or we can go right into a database and extract that content out of those databases. So we take that content out of that source system. In fact, let me pop forward and I'll tell you how we do it, right? We identify those applications and we make sure that they're set in a read-only state. We identify the sensitivity of that information, and then we identify the rules for how we're going to extract. So we build a workflow for all intents and purposes, a workflow of how we're going to extract it, and then how we're going to deliver it to the people that still need access to that content. So we build that taxonomy in the target archive, in this case, InfoArchive. We build a user experience in InfoArchive, and then we deliver from the source system through into InfoArchive. And then we go through a sort of an iterative session with the business that says, is this the user experience that you need? Do you have access? We're not talking about how sexy it is. It's, do you have access to the information that you want? And then we appropriately put in the retention, purge, and disposition components that we need to from there. So if I was going to give you a graphical representation of that, effectively, you've got 1 to dozens or hundreds of apps in your legacy archive. And whereas today, or before, if you will, the before state is you've got one or a team of people. In Ron's case, it was a team of HIM operators that were highly specialized to know a little bit about dozens of apps, right? Mm-hmm. And they would log into these apps to go and suss out, find patient information and aggregate.
They all had a list on their computers, right? A handwritten list of where to go when you get a request. It was insane.
Right. So we take each one of those source apps from the source system and we turn it into an app in the target system. So they are still unique apps in the target system. And then in the case of healthcare, for example, what we did for Fairview Health is then we synthesized all that information back into a single UI. The one thing that was consistent about all those source applications is they were all patient-based source applications. They're either patient or employee-based source systems. So we can capture all of that content and say, how do I deliver a synthesized user experience that gives us point of care, HIM operations, and back office people a single pane of glass to extract and view all the content they need from their source system. So again, we did a bunch of things that allow us to search in multiple applications. In this case, they're archived applications. Search in multiple archive applications, deliver that target information back to the user with a single pane of glass.
So, Andrew, if I had to, just looking back at, the years that I've been doing this, one of the most common words that I could use to describe what I see organizations doing, and they sometimes they even use it, simplification, right? So that's really, if I look at all the big customers that I've worked with, their goal is simplification, reduce the number of redundant systems that you're having to support, having to, train people on, having to, deal with. And that's been the driving force through to some of the largest, ROIs that I've seen, in the years that I've worked on this. And so, what you and Ron have done at Fairview is just another example of that.
Yeah. Got another question from the team. I think we've probably got time for one more question before we start jumping to the closing components of this session. But someone wants to talk about a use case specifically. In this case, he's got a mainframe application, an old legacy mainframe application. Nobody has the source code to the application. They just know they have a user experience, and they know that that's about all they know about it. So as long as you've got a login and somebody that knows how to access two things, knows how to access their user data, and then has access to the back end. For all intents and purposes, all applications everywhere in the world are based on two things, right? You've got a data source. In the case of mainframe, it's either vSAM datasets or more recent legacy applications. You've got a IBM DB2 database running on the mainframe, right? But your application is a combination of data and screens, or user experiences, user interfaces. So if you've got somebody that knows what the user experience needs to look like, we specialize. That's all we do, is specialize in finding out how to translate what's in that user experience back to where did they find that in the database, and how do we go about extracting it. That's a 2-minute answer to obviously a very complex topic. When you start talking about things, database systems with tens of thousands of databases and tables, we have specialized tools that allow us to analyze a database or a data center en masse and say, well, this is what we found in this data. Some of this data hasn't been touched for 20 years. These are the keys that are related to one another across databases. And we start to try and pull together sort of a base of knowledge about how do we go about attacking this as a application or a group of applications. Again, Kevin, you're working on a project with a company right now that effectively they're a retail organization that buys and sells up to 10 companies a year, right? And so they're constantly onboarding and offboarding legacy applications and synthesizing those legacy applications into their environment. So, what a breath of fresh air is normalizing a program for them that allows them to, when they onboard a new brand, they know exactly how they want to archive and migrate that data.
Right. Yeah, and interestingly enough, we're probably 2/3 of the way of their dealing with their mainframe. So there's very similar situation. They've sold a number of companies. They need to retrieve and get their data out of the mainframe. And so we're probably, be wrapping that up in the next few months. Whereas, so we've, got a lot of mainframe experience with IDMS and vSAM and copybooks and all the things that go on with the mainframe. So, and we, as you mentioned in Archon's got some connectors that, tap right into mainframe file systems. So it's kind of something that we've built a lot of expertise in over the past couple of years.
Yep. And not to get too nerdy, but I know working with Ron specifically on a couple of projects right now, like if you're talking about healthcare applications, right? Sometimes all you've got is like HL7 records, and sometimes you've got XML, and sometimes you've got databases.
I think we've seen it all, Andrew. Seriously, we've seen every scenario, where you've got we've had cases where we couldn't figure out the data and we had to just export it out of the system through its export tools and then create the archive from there. Other times you have perfect access to the data and you pull it out exactly how you need it. It just varies. When I think about Aaron's question and what they're facing with the mainframe, I don't really understand mainframe databases very well and how all that works. I just know that in cases where we weren't able to get at the data, we, like directly where you could connect to the database, we found ways to either export it to CSV or create the reports and export the report. You just have to, sometimes you have to be really creative in how you get at it.
Yeah.
If you can't, connect right into it. In other cases, Archon has been a magical savior where it just reaches in there and figures it out for you.
Yep, that's right. So we as an organization, as Platform 3 Solutions, we cut our teeth on our ability to connect into those source applications. So we're constantly building our library of knowledge about how to extract and archive that application. We've got a deal in Thailand right now where they're capturing, I believe it's IBM Content Manager on Demand. We just did one with Mobius Management Systems running on a mainframe environment. So we've got AS400 experience. We've got old legacy mainframe TPS banking applications, a T24 banking system. I was just talking to a guy yesterday about it. We've got that skill set as well. So again, as we build up that library of tools, we constantly work on improving and streamlining the way that we deliver that back to our customers. Hopefully that answered your question. I know that was sometimes it's a complicated and an iterative process about how do we go about accessing, and usually initial access to that source system is the longest pole in the tent, right? We spent a lot of time on energy. Me personally spent a lot of time on energy as well, on putting together some very detailed modeling that helps you identify and helps you justify an ROI. But we recognize that sometimes just starting the conversation, getting to the details of how much each application costs to operate has turned out to be a very complex exercise for most of our customers, because the source of information about the legal contract and the licensing and the database contracts is maintained all over the organization. So, but what we have done is we've built sort of a library of knowledge. So we're putting together a very simple ROI calculator on our website that, based on just a handful of questions, we're going to be able to provide you what's turned out for us to be a really pretty reliable estimate of how long it's going to take you to see an ROI. Because again, where I kicked off this conversation is, we're not trying to sell you futures. We're interested in delivering a hard dollar ROI. That's the validation for our solution. So that's coming soon on our website, and we've got phone numbers and email addresses here in the bottom. Outside of that, I think you guys, if you are going from session to session, you've got a few minutes to get a cup of coffee, use the restroom, and take a breath. Anyone have anything else? Have a good one, folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.